The sky above the palace is on fire before the first scream ever reaches the throne room. Smoke climbs from the eastern towers, curling against a moon that has no idea what's coming. Somewhere below, a convoy burns. Somewhere closer, a door that should never open swings wide from the inside. Because the enemy tonight didn't come from outside the walls. Guards who swore oaths older than their own bloodlines are already running. Not toward the danger, away from it. Their golden armor flashes once in the firelight, then vanishes down a corridor built to protect a throne nobody is protecting anymore. And in the center of it all, a woman stands alone on cracked marble. No crown, no weapon, just a torn purple robe and a spine that refuses to bend. Footsteps echo behind a shattered door. Not hers. Part 1. The floor shook. Dust fell like gray snow from a ceiling that had no business still holding together. I pressed my spine against a broken pillar, listened. Not to gunfire, to screaming, alien screaming, high cracking, the kind that comes from a throat not built for panic forced into it anyway. I had heard strange sounds since I landed on this planet. Never that one. My name is Dane Harlow, and 3 minutes earlier, my entire supply convoy had been vaporized by a shell that came from inside the palace walls. Not outside. Inside. That single fact told me everything. Someone with access. Someone with keys. Someone who didn't need to breach a wall because they already had a way in. I checked my rifle. Half a magazine. Not that it mattered much. I was a logistics specialist. Requisitions, inventory manifests. The kind of soldier who counted crates instead of kills. Except tonight the crates were on fire and there was nobody left to count. My comm line was dead. Just static in the far-off crackle of something burning that used to be a command tent. My unit was gone, scattered. Or worse, I should have run. Every hour of training told me to fall back to the extraction corridor and let the locals handle their own coup. This was not my planet. This was not my fight. Except I heard something through the smoke. A voice giving orders in a language I barely understood. Followed by feet. Many feet. Running. Away. Not toward the danger. Away from a room they were sworn to defend. I moved forward. Because I didn't know what else to do. Because in 6 years of logistics work, I had learned exactly one thing about soldiers who run from a post instead of holding it. Whatever's behind them needs help more than they do. The throne room doors hung half off their hinges. Smoke curled through the gap like fingers. I stepped through, rifle up, expecting an enemy. Instead, I found her. She stood alone on cracked marble, surrounded by the wreckage of gold pillars that used to reach toward a ceiling, now open to a sky full of smoke and dying light. Tall, taller than me by a head, skin with a faint blue shimmer under the emergency lights, eyes like glass catching fire. No armor, no weapon, just a torn robe of deep purple, the kind that marks a woman who commands fleets and has never once needed to defend herself. Until tonight. She turned at the sound of my boots. Neither of us moved. Fear in her eyes, real fear. The kind that comes when a person understands all at once that they have been abandoned completely. Behind her, through a side passage, I caught the flash of golden armor disappearing into the dark. Her guards, not looking back, not once. She straightened her spine anyway, lifted her chin, even as her hands shook at her sides. "If you've come to finish what they started," she said, steady voice, shaking hands, "then do it quickly. I will not beg a human for my life." I lowered the rifle, not all the way. "I'm not here to hurt you." She studied me the way you study a predator that hasn't decided yet. "Your kind does not come to my world without a reason. Tell me why you're truly here. And don't waste my final moments with lies." "Got separated from my convoy," I said. "Heard people running away from this room instead of defending it. That told me something was wrong." Something shifted behind her eyes. Confusion, then disbelief. My guards swore an oath upon the old stones of this palace. Well, I glanced at the empty passage. They broke that oath about 2 minutes ago. Whatever they promised, it didn't survive the first explosion. She flinched, just slightly. And I understood something then. The wound those fleeing guards left was deeper than anything the fighting outside could do. Betrayal cuts differently than a blade. I'd seen that look before. On soldiers who found out their own commanders sold them out for a signing bonus and a clean record. The look of someone realizing the people they trusted only ever cared about themselves. Another explosion. Closer. Chunks of ceiling came down near the far wall. She staggered, caught herself against a broken column. I moved without thinking. Closed the distance. Caught her arm before she hit the ground. She pulled back like my hand had burned her. "Do not touch me. Then don't fall," I said, releasing her the second she found her footing. "We don't have time for pride. This whole building is coming apart." "And why," she said, breathing hard, "would a human logistics soldier care whether an alien queen lives or dies? Your people did not come to this world to save us. You came because our trade routes were useful. Do not pretend this is kindness." I understood the anger. I'd heard the same argument from officers back on my own ship. Cynical men who called this whole alliance a business deal wrapped in nice language. Maybe she was right about most of my kind. But I wasn't going to debate politics while the ceiling fell on our heads. "I don't know what my government wants from your planet," I said. "Honest. I don't make those decisions. I know what I want right now, which is to get both of us out of this room before it collapses. You can hate me after we're both still breathing." Long silence. Something changed behind those glass-colored eyes. Surprise, maybe. Or the first small crack in a lifetime of being told humans could never be trusted. "The rebels control the Eastern Gate," she said finally. Quieter, more practical. "My private passage lies beneath the throne itself. It requires a seal only royal blood can open." "Then let's go, before whoever set off that explosion checks if it worked." She hesitated. One breath, then nodded. Sharp, decisive. She walked toward the throne. I fell into step behind her, scanning shadows, rifle ready. She pressed her palm against a hidden panel. A section of floor slid open with a low grinding sound. A stairway descended into dark. Cool air rose up, stone and something faintly metallic. "Guards are trained never to reveal this passage exists," she said, suspicion still in her voice. "You are the second living being outside my bloodline to see it." "I'll try to earn the trust," I said, and meant it. She looked at me a moment longer, then descended without another word. I followed, boots echoing against stone that hadn't felt weight in generations. Above us, the throne room shuddered under another blast. Dust rained through the closing gap. We made it a few steps down. Then the ground trembled. A section of stairway crumbled beneath her feet. I lunged, caught her arm, pulled her hard against the wall as loose stone tumbled past into the black below. She was breathing fast, pressed close beside me in the narrow passage. Her hand had gripped my jacket without her noticing. She noticed a second later, released me, stepped back, embarrassed. "You did not have to do that. You'd have fallen into a hole with no bottom I could see," I said. Seemed important. A faint sound escaped her, something between a laugh and disbelief. "You are a strange soldier." "You have no idea," I said, and gestured for her to keep moving. We continued, slower now, testing each step. The sounds of battle faded above us, replaced by heavy silence, broken only by footsteps and the occasional rumble of a palace still deciding whether to fully collapse. Then, shouting, sharp, urgent, followed by the crash of something heavy breaking through the throne room floor. The rebels had found the passage. "How much further?" I asked. "The tunnel opens near the old temple grounds," she said, moving faster now despite the danger. From there, we may find shelter among those still loyal to my family. May? She glanced back. In her eyes, I saw the terrible weight of a queen who no longer knew who among her own people could be trusted. Tonight has taught me that loyalty is a fragile thing, she said. I no longer know who remains faithful and who has already chosen a new master. Behind us, pounding boots, voices promising no mercy for whoever they found in these tunnels. We need to move faster, I said. She nodded, and we ran deeper into the dark. Two strangers from different worlds, bound now by nothing more than circumstance and a shared will to survive the night. The tunnel narrowed, forced us single file between walls slick with moisture and age. Behind us pursuit, steady, neither closer nor farther. Like whoever hunted us knew exactly how much rope to give. They are hurting us, she said, slowing her pace, glancing back. This tunnel splits ahead. If they wanted to catch us quickly, they would have already tried. I didn't like the sound of that. When an enemy lets you run instead of catching you fast, it usually means they're pushing you towards something worse than themselves. Is there another way out besides the split? A maintenance shaft, 200 paces past the fork, leads into the old grain district. Narrow but unguarded, as far as I know. As far as you know. Tonight, that is the most certainty I can offer you about anything. No humor in it this time. We reached the fork, two dark openings, both equally uninviting. She hesitated. 1 second. Chose the right passage. I trusted her judgment completely. She'd lived in this palace her whole life. I'd been on this planet 4 months. The right tunnel sloped upward. Air grew warmer, faint smell of grain and old wood. Getting close to the surface, I let myself feel the smallest flicker of relief, which is exactly when the tunnel exploded with movement. Two armed figures dropped from a hidden alcove, weapons already raised, armor marked with a broken circle, red over black. Rebels, waiting. They knew this passage. They'd known it before we did. I fired first, caught the closer one in the shoulder, spun him into the wall. The second raised his weapon toward her. I threw myself sideways, tackled her to the ground as a bolt of energy scorched the stone exactly where her head had been a heartbeat earlier. We hit the ground hard, her back against the tunnel floor, my body over hers. And for one suspended moment, I felt her heartbeat under my forearm. Fast, terrified, very much alive. Then instinct took over. I rolled off, fired twice more. The second attacker went down, didn't move again. Silence, broken only by our ragged breathing. Are you hurt? I asked, pulling her up by the arm. No. Her voice shook slightly. She looked down at the fallen rebel, studying his armor with an expression I couldn't read. This mark, I have seen it before. On documents smuggled into the palace weeks ago. Warnings my advisors dismissed as rumor. What warnings? That a faction within my own court grew tired of waiting for succession. That some believed the throne would serve their ambitions better empty, or filled with someone easier to control. I crouched beside the fallen rebel, professional habit overriding the tension in my chest. 6 years of paperwork teaches a man something strange. You stop seeing the fight in front of you. You start seeing the fight's receipts, the manifests, the serial numbers, the little marks that tell you where something came from and who signed off on it. I checked his weapon and froze. The design was unmistakably human. A rifle model I'd cataloged a dozen times back on Earth. Contractor issue, not standard military, not anything a rebel faction on this planet should have been able to source on its own. I'd know. I was the one who tracked the manifest. This weapon, I said, holding it up, this isn't local. Somebody on my side of the sky sold this to your rebels. Her eyes widened, then narrowed back at me. Suspicion, quick and sharp. Then perhaps your presence here tonight was not an accident after all. I didn't know anything about this, I said, meeting her gaze without flinching. I catalog shipments. I don't approve them. Whoever sold these did it far above my clearance, probably far above anyone I've ever met. She studied me. Long moment, turning the pieces over. Finally, she exhaled. I believe you, for now. Mostly because if you intended me harm, you have had several perfect opportunities already, and used none of them. I'll take that as progress, I said, gestured toward the passage ahead. We should keep moving. We reached the maintenance shaft, narrow, rusted rungs climbing into darkness. She climbed first. Surprising grace despite the tight space. I followed, watching below for pursuit. The shaft opened into a small stone structure at the edge of an old storage district. Rows of low buildings under sloped roofs. Dark, silent. Smoke still rising from the palace behind us, staining the horizon a dull orange. This district was abandoned years ago, she said, stepping over debris, when newer facilities were built closer to the capital. Few even remember it exists. Good, I said. Fewer people to look for us here. We found shelter in one of the smaller buildings, roof mostly intact, interior empty except old crates and dust undisturbed in decades. She sat against one of the crates, and for the first time since I found her in the throne room, exhaustion overtook the composed mask she'd been wearing. You've been running on pure will since I found you, I said, settling across from her, rifle across my knees. You should rest while we can. A queen does not simply rest while her kingdom burns. The words carried less conviction than before. A queen who collapses from exhaustion isn't much use to her kingdom either, I said. I've handled enough field intake reports to know what happens when people push past the point of usefulness. It doesn't end well. She was quiet, studying me in the dim light through cracks in the roof. You speak to me as an equal, she said finally, not as royalty, not as an alien to be feared or studied, simply as another person trying to survive the night. Is that a problem? No. Something in her voice had softened. It is unexpected. Most of your kind who visited my court treated me either with excessive formality or thinly disguised suspicion. You have done neither. Maybe I just don't see the point in pretending, I said. We're both just trying to stay alive right now. Titles don't matter much when someone's shooting at you. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. First genuine one all night. You have an interesting way of looking at the world. Dane, I said. You can drop whatever formal address you were about to use. We've been through enough tonight. Dane, she repeated, testing the sound. Then you may call me Isabel, though few outside my family have ever used that name without title attached. Isabel, I said, and something about speaking her true name in that quiet, dusty room felt like the first real moment of trust between us. We sat in silence a while, listening to a city in chaos far off. Tell me something, she said eventually. Why did you truly stay in the throne room? You could have run when you heard my guards fleeing. Any reasonable soldier would have retreated and reported the situation. I considered the question carefully. Because running when someone needs help isn't something I know how to do. Maybe that's foolish. Maybe it's gotten me passed over for promotion more than once. But I've never been able to walk past someone about to be left completely alone. She looked at me a long moment, something unreadable behind her eyes. Where I come from, that kind of loyalty is rare enough to be legend. Soldiers swear oaths for advancement, for wealth, for fear of punishment, rarely because it is simply who they are. Guess I'm just built a little different, I said. Outside, a low rumble rolled across the sky, flashes of light in the distance. The fighting hadn't stopped, only moved. We'd need to keep moving soon, find somewhere more permanent to plan. But for now, in this small, quiet room hidden among ruins, I let myself believe we'd bought a few precious hours of safety. Isabel closed her eyes, finally allowing herself rest. I kept watch, mind turning over everything. A human weapon in a rebel's hands. Guards who abandoned their oath the instant danger arrived. Whatever tomorrow brought, I knew one thing: sitting there in the dark, watching over a queen who'd somehow become my responsibility in the space of a single terrifying night. This was no longer simply about surviving until dawn. Dawn broke gray and heavy, filtering through cracks in thin, dusty beams. I hadn't slept. Body rested, mind cycling through every detail, searching for what I'd missed. Isabel stirred as the light grew, blinking awake with a disoriented look of someone who'd forgotten for one brief moment how dangerous her world had become. "We should move before full daylight," she said, pushing upright, smoothing torn fabric with a reflexive gesture, a habit from a life where appearance mattered as much as survival. "There are safe houses loyal to my family in the lower districts, though I cannot promise any remain untouched." "Lead the way," I said, checking my rifle a final time. The city looked different in daylight, worse somehow than the confusion of the night before. Buildings leaning at broken angles, windows shattered, smoke still curling from a dozen fires across the skyline. We moved through narrow alleys, avoiding main roads. Nearly an hour before we reached our destination, a modest stone house tucked into a quiet residential district, unremarkable enough to avoid attention. Isabel knocked in a specific pattern: 3 quick taps, 2 slower, long tense pause. The door opened. An elderly woman, silver-marked skin, eyes widening with shock the moment she recognized who stood on her doorstep. "Your Majesty," voice breathing out the words, pulling the door wider, glancing nervously up and down the street. "Come inside quickly." We slipped in. She bolted the door with shaking hands. Inside, simple but clean, the quiet warmth of a life lived carefully. She introduced herself as Odalis, former handmaiden to Isabel's mother, living in quiet retirement now. "I heard the palace had fallen," Odalis said, voice trembling as she guided us to a small table. "I feared the worst, Your Majesty. How did you survive?" "Because of him," Isabel said, glancing at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "My own guards fled the moment danger arrived. This soldier stayed when he had every reason to leave." Odalis studied me, gratitude and suspicion both at once. "A human," she said slowly. "Forgive me, but your kind has rarely shown such loyalty to anyone outside your own species." "Starting to hear that a lot," I said. "Guess I'll just have to keep proving it wrong." Odalis brought food and water, simple fare, welcome after the night we'd endured. And while we ate, she shared what little news had reached her small corner of the city. "The rebellion," she explained, "calls itself the Severance Accord, a faction that grew quietly within the noble houses for years, gathering support among those who believed the old bloodline had grown weak, out of touch. But rebellions of this size do not happen without resources," she said, lowering her voice as if the walls might be listening. "Weapons, supplies, funding. The Accord has grown far too powerful, far too quickly, for a group that claims to represent calm and discontent." I thought immediately of the human weapon still tucked into my pack. "We found evidence last night," I said. "At least some of their weapons came from off-world. Human contractor issue, not standard military." Her expression darkened. Then the rumors were true after all. I had heard whispers weeks ago. Human ships making unauthorized landings near the southern coast, far from any official trade route. I dismissed it as gossip. I should have known better. Isabel set down the piece of bread she'd been eating, her expression hardening. "If humans are supplying weapons to the Accord, then someone within your own government knew and said nothing." The accusation landed heavily. I felt the weight of it settle on my shoulders, even though I'd done nothing to deserve the blame. "If that's true," I said slowly, "then I need to find out who. Because if my own people are arming your enemies, that's not just a betrayal of your world. That's a betrayal of the mission I was sent here for." "How would you even begin such an investigation?" Odalis asked. "You are cut off from your unit, hunted by the same forces hunting the Queen. Where would you look?" I thought about it, running through everything I knew about the chain of command. There's a human logistics command near the trade docks, run by a general named Corbin Vane. He oversees off-world shipments for our forces here. If unauthorized weapons were moving, either he approved them, or someone bypassed him entirely, which would be almost impossible given how tightly he controls that port. You believe this general may be responsible, Isabel asked, watching me carefully. I don't want to believe it, I admitted, but I've spent 6 years reading manifests for a living. I've learned not to rule anything out until I have proof one way or the other. Odalis rose, moved toward a small cabinet in the corner, retrieved a folded piece of paper worn soft from handling, passed it to Isabel. This arrived 3 days before the palace fell, slipped beneath my door in the middle of the night. I did not know what to make of it at the time. Isabel unfolded the paper carefully. I leaned over to read alongside her. Native script scattered throughout several words in English, phonetically transcribed by whoever wrote the note. Among them, unmistakably, a name, Vane. This confirms it, Isabel said quietly, voice tight with barely controlled anger. Someone within the resistance knew enough about your general to include his name in a warning meant for loyalists. We need proof, I said, mind already working through the possibilities. Something that connects him directly to the shipments. Without that, it's just a name on paper. Easy to deny. The trade docks hold shipping records, Odalis offered. If General Vane authorized unauthorized transfers, there would be documentation somewhere, even if meant to remain hidden. That's a heavily guarded facility, I said. Getting in without authorization would be difficult even under normal circumstances. Right now, with a rebellion in full swing, security will be at its highest. Then we will need a plan more clever than simply walking through the front gate, Isabel said, and I caught the faintest hint of determination returning to her voice, replacing some of the exhaustion and fear from the night before. We spent the next several hours in Odalis's small home, planning carefully while the sounds of continued fighting echoed distantly across the city. Odalis provided what she could about the dock's layout, drawn from memory of visits decades earlier during her years of palace service. Not perfect information, but more than we had before. As afternoon light filtered through the windows, Isabel excused herself briefly to rest in the small guest room. I remained at the table, turning the human weapon over in my hands. I read objects the way other men read faces. The stamp on the barrel, the way the metal was machined. Small details that told a bigger story than anyone wanted told. Odalis joined me quietly, settling into the chair across from me, the careful movements of someone who'd spent a lifetime observing before speaking. You care for her, she said, not quite a question. I glanced up, caught off guard. I barely know her, met her less than a day ago. And yet you have risked your life twice already to protect her, Odalis said, gentle rather than accusing. I have lived long enough to recognize loyalty when I see it forming. Dane, even when the one feeling it has not yet named it for himself. I didn't have a good answer for that, so I said nothing. Kept turning the weapon in my hands, pretending to focus entirely on the serial number. She has known very little kindness in her life, Odalis continued after a moment, raised from birth to rule, surrounded always by those who wanted something from her. Influence, protection, advancement. I do not think she has ever had someone stand beside her simply because they wish to, without expectation of reward. I'm not looking for a reward, I said quietly. I know, Odalis said, something almost sad in the way she said it. That is precisely why it matters. The conversation settled into silence. I found myself thinking about everything she'd said, turning it over alongside the growing evidence of betrayal we'd uncovered. By the time Isabel re-emerged looking marginally more restored, I'd made a decision. I'm going to the trade docks tonight, I said, alone. Absolutely not. Isabel's tone sharp enough that Odalis glanced between us. If General Vane is truly involved, walking into his territory alone is reckless beyond reason, which is exactly why it needs to be me, Not you, I said. You're the target here, Isabel. If anyone spots you near that dock, it's over. But I'm just a logistics clerk. If I'm careful, I can move through those docks without raising suspicion, at least long enough to find what we need. And if you are caught genuine worry beneath the frustration in her voice, then I'll deal with that when it happens, I said. But someone has to get that proof. And I'm the only one of us who can walk into a human facility without immediately becoming a target. Isabel was quiet a long moment, wrestling with the logic even as every instinct told her to refuse. Finally, she exhaled, some tension leaving her shoulders. I do not like this plan. Noted, I said. Doesn't change that it's still our best option. If you are not back by dawn, she said, fixing me with a look that carried more weight than her words alone, I will come looking for you myself, regardless of the danger. Then I guess I'd better be back by dawn, I said. And something passed between us in that moment, unspoken, clearly understood by both of us. Odalus provided me with a dark cloak, and as evening fell over the ruined city, I prepared to leave. Isabel walked me to the door. For a moment we simply stood there, neither quite sure what to say. Be careful, Dane, she said finally. Always am, I said, which was mostly a lie, but felt like the right thing to say in the moment. I slipped out into the darkening streets, moving through alleys and shadows toward the distant lights of the trade docks, senses alert for any sign of rebel patrols or human checkpoints. The city had settled into an uneasy, exhausted quiet. Because somewhere out there past those floodlights was the answer to a question I couldn't stop turning over. Who wanted a queen dead? And why one of my own people had helped make it happen? I didn't know yet how deep it went. I didn't know yet that the name on that folded paper was only the surface. That behind General Corbin Vane stood something bigger than a smuggling ring. Something that reached past this planet entirely. I only knew that docks were an hour's walk away, and that whatever I found there would decide what kind of soldier I chose to be when this was over. Not the kind who counts crates, the kind who counts what actually matters. Part 2. The trade docks came into view just after full dark. A sprawling complex of warehouses and landing platforms lit by harsh floodlights. Human soldiers patrolling the perimeter with the same discipline I drilled into requisition crews for 6 years. Getting inside without authorization would take patience, and no small amount of luck. I found an access point along the eastern wall, a maintenance entrance used by supply crews, less guarded than the main gates. Nobody expects a break-in through the door reserved for paperwork, which is exactly what I was counting on. Tucked inside my jacket was a small leather notebook, worn at the corners, filled with 6 years of my own handwriting. Shipment codes, cargo weights, serial number prefixes I'd memorized without meaning to the way some men memorize batting averages. Nobody ever asks the logistics clerk what he knows. That's the mistake everyone makes about men like me. Inside the warehouse stretched out in rows of towering crates, dimly lit, mostly empty at this hour. I moved through shadows toward the administrative building near the center, windows dark except one upstairs burning low. I slipped through an unlocked side entrance, found the records room on the ground floor, rows of data terminals humming in the dark. I settled at the nearest one. My clearance was limited. Logistics access only. Limited access is still access. I knew exactly which folders to check first because I'd built half of this filing system myself 3 postings ago, back when nobody thought a records architecture mattered enough to remember who designed it. I opened my notebook, started cross-referencing. A man who spends 6 years writing down numbers nobody reads eventually finds out something strange. The numbers start talking back. I found a shipment log 4 months ago, marked humanitarian relief. Weight didn't match. Cargo class didn't match. I'd seen that exact weight discrepancy once before back on a training deployment, and it had turned out to be smuggled ordnance disguised as medical freight. I checked the authorization signature. Vain. Not once. 7 times. 7 separate shipments, each one dressed up in the language of charity. each one signed by the same hand. My own handwriting on the page started to blur because my hands weren't steady anymore. This wasn't an oversight. This wasn't one bad decision made under pressure. This was a system, built slowly, deliberately, hidden beneath exactly the kind of routine paperwork a records clerk was supposed to glance past without ever really seeing. Except I saw it, because seeing it was the only thing I'd ever been good at. I downloaded everything onto a small data drive. Hands steadier now, anger doing what anger does, burning off the fear and leaving something colder behind. And that's when the footsteps started in the hallway. Two sets, low voices, urgent. I ducked behind the terminal row just as the office door opened. One man in a human officer's uniform, the other in civilian clothes that marked him as something else entirely. Someone who didn't answer to any uniform at all. "The Queen is still alive," the civilian voice tight. "Your people were supposed to ensure she didn't survive the siege." "These things take time." The officer. I recognized that voice immediately. I'd sat through 3 logistics briefings, listening to it drone through supply projections. General Corbin Vane. "The severance accord assured me their forces had the palace fully secured," Vane said. "If she survived, that's a failure on their part, not mine." "A failure that could unravel everything we built," the civilian snapped. "If she reaches loyalist forces and exposes what you've done, this operation collapses. Both of us face consequences far worse than losing a trade contract." "She will not survive long," Vane's voice cold, confident. "She has no army, no guards, nothing but whatever scraps of loyalty remain scattered across a burning city. It's only a matter of time." I stayed still, perfectly still, memorizing every word. Whatever this was, it went past weapons smuggling. This was coordination. A plan built between a human general and forces inside the rebellion aimed at one specific outcome. They kept talking. Logistics, timelines, words that meant little to me without more context. Except one phrase caught. The civilian mentioned something about the Southern arrangement holding, regardless of the girl. Girl, not queen, like she was an inconvenience in someone else's contract. An arrangement bigger than one planet. I filed that away. I didn't understand it yet, but I would. Eventually they left, footsteps fading down the hall. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I had what we needed. Now I just needed to get back to Isabel before dawn. I slipped out through the eastern entrance without incident, moving through shadowed streets as gray light began creeping across the horizon. Dawn approaching fast, I quickened my pace. Except 2 streets from the safe house, a shape stepped out from the shadows ahead of me. Weapon already raised, golden trim on his armor, even in the dim light. One of Isabel's own royal guards. One of the men who'd fled the throne room. "You should not have survived the night, human." Cold voice, steady. "Where is the Queen?" I said nothing, calculating distance. Options. Somewhere behind him, the soft click of a second weapon readying in the dark. Whatever answer I gave in the next few seconds would decide whether she lived to see another sunrise. I kept my hands loose, rifle angled down, but ready. Fear in his face. The same fear I'd seen the night he fled. Mixed now with something else. Shame, maybe. Or the desperate need to prove himself again after failing so completely. "She's alive," I said carefully. "No thanks to you." His jaw tightened. The second figure stepped into view, younger, weapon trembling slightly in his grip. "We were ordered to retreat," the younger one said, though his voice lacked conviction. "The Accord's forces were too many. Staying meant certain death for all of us." "Funny," I said. "I stayed. I'm still standing here." "You are human," the older guard snapped. "You do not understand what oaths mean in our culture, what it costs a soldier to break one." "I understand exactly what it cost," I said, voice hardening. "It cost your queen everything. She stood alone in that throne room while the people sworn to protect her ran for the exits. I understand oaths just fine. Seems like you're the one who forgot what yours meant. The older guard flinched, long silence, broken only by the distant sound of a city slowly waking to another day of fear. We wish to make amends, the younger one said finally, lowering his weapon slightly. If the queen still lives, we would return to her service, if she will have us. I studied both of them, weighing the risk. After everything we'd uncovered about Vane trusting anyone came with real danger attached. I also understood something about second chances, about the difference between cowardice born of panic and true betrayal born of malice. These two ran from fear, not sold their loyalty for profit. At least that's what it looked like, which turned out to be exactly the mistake I'd remember making weeks later when I finally understood what fear can be twisted into if someone squeezes the right person hard enough. But I didn't know that yet. Standing in that alley, I only knew what my gut told me. That's not my decision to make, I said. But if you're serious, you'll come with me. Let her decide for herself. The older guard nodded slowly, lowering his weapon fully. My name is Brant. This is Rourke Kell, my sister's boy. We swear upon whatever honor remains to us that we mean the queen no harm. I led them back toward O'Dalius's house, watching them closely the entire way. We reached it just as full dawn broke. I knocked in the pattern Odalus had taught me. The door opened. Isabel's eyes went wide relief and alarm both at once when she saw the two guards standing behind me. Brant, she said, voice sharp with barely controlled emotion. Rourke, you dare return after abandoning me. Your Majesty. Brant dropped to one knee. Rourke followed half a second later. We have no excuse worthy of forgiveness. We fled in fear. That fear will haunt us the rest of our lives, however long that may be. We ask only for the chance to serve you again. Isabel stared down at them a long, tense moment. I watched the war happening behind her eyes. Years of trust shattered in a single night weighed against the practical reality that she needed every ally she could find. Finally, you will have your chance to prove yourselves, she said, cold but not without mercy. But know this, should either of you falter again, there will be no third opportunity. Understood, Your Majesty. Relief in Brant's voice as he and his nephew rose. I pulled Isabel aside, explained everything from the docks, the shipping records, the conversation between Vane and his civilian contact, the phrase about a southern arrangement. Her expression grew darker with each detail. This goes deeper than I feared, she said quietly. Your general is not simply profiting from chaos. He is actively working to ensure my death. Which means we need to move fast, I said. If Vane believes his plan is unraveling, he'll accelerate whatever comes next. We need to get this evidence to someone who can act on it. There is Colonel Weiss, Isabel said thoughtfully. Your ranking officer at the Northern Outpost. My mother always spoke well of him. He struck her as an honorable man. Weiss. I recognize the name. That's actually a good option. He outranks Vane in field command, even if Vane controls logistics. If we get this evidence to him directly, he might move against Vane before this goes further. Before we could finalize anything, my comm device, silent since the siege began, crackled to life. Harlow, this is Colonel Weiss. Come in. Harlow, do you copy? I grabbed the device, relief flooding through me at the sound of a friendly voice. Weiss, this is Harlow. I copy. I have critical information regarding General Vane and the situation on the ground here. A pause, longer than I expected. Harlow, listen carefully. Command has ordered a full withdrawal of all forces from the capital region. Extraction ships already inbound. You need to reach the northern outpost within 6 hours to make the last transport out. My stomach dropped. Withdrawal. Sir, the Queen is alive. I'm with her right now. If we pull out, we're leaving her completely exposed to a rebellion that's actively trying to kill her. A rebellion General Vane has been arming. Another pause, heavier this time. I hear you, Harlow, but this order comes from well above my authority. Political situation back home has shifted. Command has decided this conflict falls outside our mandate. We are not authorized to intervene further in what they're calling an internal political matter. That's not internal if one of our own generals is manufacturing the conflict for personal gain, I said, voice rising despite trying to stay calm. I have proof, sir. Shipping records. A recorded conversation. Vane sold weapons to the rebellion and is actively coordinating to ensure the Queen doesn't survive. The silence that followed was the longest yet. Get to the outpost, Harlow, Weiss said finally. Quieter now, more careful, choosing each word like he was picking his way across broken glass. Bring whatever evidence you have. We'll sort this out properly through the right channels once you're somewhere safe. And the Queen, I asked. What happens to her while we sort things out through the right channels? That's not your concern anymore, soldier. Something in his tone told me this conversation was being monitored, that he was choosing words for reasons beyond simple caution. Extraction in 6 hours. Do not miss that window. The line went dead. I stood there, staring at the silent comm device, anger and confusion warring in my chest. Weiss didn't sound like a man giving an order he believed in. He sounded like a man reading lines someone else had written for him. They are ordering you to abandon this world, Isabel said quietly, watching my expression. To abandon me? Yeah, I said. That's exactly what they're doing. Then you should go, she said, voice steady, but something fractured beneath the surface of those words. I will not ask you to defy your own command, Dane. You have already done more for me than any human, any ally has done in longer than I can remember. That debt is paid in full. I looked at her, standing there, trying so hard to release me from an obligation she clearly didn't want to release me from. And something settled firmly inside my chest, a decision I realized I'd already made without fully admitting it to myself. I'm not going anywhere, I said. Dane. They gave that order because Vane is scared, I said, cutting her off. He knows I'm on to him. He's using the chain of command to get me off this planet before I can expose what he's done. If I get on that extraction ship, this evidence disappears into some bureaucratic black hole, and you're left here alone to face whatever comes next. I'm not letting that happen. Isabel studied my face, searching for any hesitation, any sign I might change my mind under pressure. She found none, because there was none to find. Defying direct orders carries severe consequences among your people, she said. Are you certain you understand what you're risking? I understand exactly what I'm risking, I said, and I'm choosing to risk it anyway. Odalis, listening quietly from across the room, stepped forward. If you intend to stay and fight this conspiracy, you will need more than just the two of you. I still have contacts among the loyalist nobility, families who have not yet declared for the accord. It may take time, but I can reach them. We don't have much time, I said. Vane knows I'm on to him now. He'll move fast to cover his tracks or eliminate the threat entirely. Then we move faster, Isabel said, and I saw the Queen returning to her posture, shoulders squared, eyes sharp with renewed purpose. Brant, Rourke, are you prepared to fight for the throne you failed to protect once already? With everything we have left, Your Majesty, Brant said firmly. Rourke nodded beside him. I watched him nod, watched the way his eyes dropped a half-second too long before he lifted them again. I noticed it, filed it away the way I filed everything. A small discrepancy in an otherwise clean manifest. I didn't know yet what it meant. I only knew somewhere in the back of my mind a column didn't add up. We spent the following hours planning as carefully as circumstances allowed, piecing together a strategy from limited resources and uncertain allies. Odalis left to make contact with loyalist families she trusted. Brant and Rourke worked to identify which remaining palace guards might still be reached, soldiers who scattered during the chaos but hadn't necessarily joined the rebellion. I spent my time reviewing the evidence I'd gathered, cross-referencing against my own notebook page by page, searching for the strongest points to present once we found someone with the authority and the integrity to act on it. Evidence only matters if you hand it to the right person in the right order with the receipts to back it up. I'd spent 6 years building receipts nobody wanted. Now somebody finally needed them. Weiss's careful, guarded tone during our call stuck with me. The sense that he'd wanted to say more but couldn't, not over an open channel someone else might be listening to. By late afternoon, Odalis returned with news that shifted our entire strategy. 3 noble houses, families with significant standing among the population, and their own private security forces had agreed to a secret meeting that evening, willing to hear evidence of the conspiracy before committing their support to either side of the growing conflict. "This is our opportunity," Isabel said, studying the details Odalis provided. "If these houses stand with us, others will follow. The tide of this rebellion could turn. It's also incredibly dangerous," I pointed out. "If word of this meeting reaches Vane or the Accord before it happens, we're walking into a trap instead of an alliance." "Every choice available to us carries danger, Dane," Isabel said. "I would rather face that danger fighting for my people than hiding in tunnels while my kingdom falls apart around me." I couldn't argue with that logic, even though every instinct told me this plan carried enormous risk. We prepared through the remaining daylight hours, and as evening approached, we made our way carefully through the city toward the location Odalis had arranged. A private estate belonging to one of the noble families tucked into a quieter district that had so far avoided the worst of the fighting. The meeting itself proved tense from the very first moment. 3 noble representatives sat across from us in a dimly lit study, guarded expressions, skeptical, as Isabel laid out everything we discovered supported by the evidence I'd gathered at the docks. I watched their faces carefully, gauging reactions, ready to intervene if the conversation turned hostile. "You are asking us to believe that a human general deliberately armed the rebellion against our own queen," one noble said finally. Doubt laced through his tone. "This is a serious accusation, with equally serious consequences if proven false." "I understand your skepticism," I said, stepping forward, placing the data drive on the table between us. "But this is an accusation without evidence. Shipping manifests, cargo records, 7 separate shipments, all with General Vane's own authorization signature. I cross-checked every discrepancy myself. I also personally overheard him discussing a plan to ensure the Queen did not survive the siege." The nobles exchanged uncertain glances, torn between the weight of the evidence and the enormous risk of committing to a losing side in an already dangerous conflict. For one long moment, I actually believed it was working. I let myself believe the hardest part was behind us, that this room, this quiet study with its careful lamplight, was where the whole thing turned around. A night spent running for your life teaches you a dangerous habit. You start believing the worst part is always the part you just survived. Before any of them could respond, the sound of shattering glass echoed from the front of the estate, followed immediately by shouting, the unmistakable sound of weapons fire. "They found us," Brant said, already moving toward the study door, weapon raised. I grabbed Isabel's arm, pulled her toward a side exit as the noble representatives scrambled for their own security details. Chaos erupting through the estate in seconds. Whoever tracked us here moved with terrifying speed and precision, suggesting inside knowledge that went beyond simple luck. "This was not a coincidence," Isabel said as we ran, sounds of fighting growing louder behind us. "We'll figure out who later," I said. "Right now we need to get out of this building alive." We burst through the side exit into a courtyard already filling with armed figures. Rebel forces closing in from multiple directions. Coordinated. Precise. Like this had been planned well in advance. Not a hasty response to discovered intelligence. My rifle came up instinctively. I fired twice. Dropped the nearest threat. But more figures poured into the courtyard faster than I could account for them. "There are too many," Rourke shouted from somewhere behind us, voice tight with panic. I grabbed Isabel, pulled her behind a low stone wall as bolts of energy scorched the air where we'd been standing a moment before. My mind raced through options, all dangerous, none guaranteed to work. Somewhere in that chaos, buried under gunfire and shouting, one detail kept surfacing. Someone in this operation had known exactly where we'd be tonight, exactly when. And the only people who knew were sitting in a room right before it happened. I didn't have time to chase that thought all the way down, not with the courtyard filling faster than I could count the bodies moving through it. Isabel's hand found my arm in the dark, gripping tight. Dane, whatever comes next. Whatever comes next, I said, we're not done yet. The meeting that was supposed to save her kingdom had just become another trap. And I still didn't know, not yet, which face in our small circle of trust had opened the door and let it in. We stayed pinned behind that stone wall for what felt like the longest 10 seconds of the entire siege. Bolts of energy chewing at the edges of the stone. Rourke firing blind over the top, breathing hard, his voice cracking with every shout. Isabel's grip on my arm hadn't loosened. "There is a way to end this quickly," she said, "but it requires you to trust me completely." "I'm listening," I said, firing another shot over the wall to keep them back. My royal signet carries an authority even the Accord cannot easily ignore. She pulled a small golden ring from beneath her torn robe, one I hadn't noticed her wearing. Until now. "If I reveal myself openly, declare my claim before witnesses from multiple noble houses, it forces a choice. Those still loyal to tradition, even reluctantly, will be bound by ancient law to defend their sovereign." "That means stepping into the open," I said, "directly into their line of fire." "Yes." Simple, steady. "It is a risk, but it may be the only way to turn this before we are overwhelmed entirely." I stared at her, understanding exactly what she was proposing, and the fear gripping my chest at the thought of her standing exposed in a firefight was sharper than anything I'd felt since this whole ordeal began. "I'm not letting you do that alone," I said. "I never intended to," she said. Part 3. We rose from behind the wall together. I stayed close, rifle raised, ready to cut down anyone who tried to strike her before her words could reach the ears that mattered. Isabel lifted the golden signet high. Her voice rang out across the courtyard, clear and commanding. "I am Isabel, rightful sovereign of this world, daughter of an unbroken bloodline stretching back 1,000 generations." Her voice carried an authority I hadn't heard from her before. Ancient, unshakable. "Those who strike against me tonight strike against the ancient law itself. I call upon every soldier bound by oath to remember what that oath truly means." For a moment, the fighting seemed to hesitate, chaos slowing as her words registered. Several attacking figures lowered their weapons, uncertainty flickering across faces hidden behind combat gear, torn between orders given and oaths sworn long before this rebellion began. Except not all of them wavered. A figure stepped forward from the rebel ranks, tall, imposing, armor marked with the broken circle. And I understood immediately this was someone of real authority within the Accord. "Pretty words for a dying queen," he said, cold, mocking. "And who granted you the weapons to seize that power, Maverick Thorn?" Isabel called back. Deliberate, pointed. Thorn's expression flickered just slightly, confirming what we already suspected. "Careful with your accusations, former queen. You have no proof of anything." "I have exactly that," I called out, stepping forward beside her, holding up the data drive. "Shipping records, authorization signatures, a recorded conversation between your benefactor and my own command about how best to ensure this queen never survives the night. General Corbin Vane has been arming you from the beginning, using your rebellion for purposes that have nothing to do with whatever cause you claim to fight for." Murmurs rippled through the gathered rebel forces, uncertainty spreading outward as soldiers exchanged glances, hearing something they hadn't expected. Thorne's composure cracked further. Lies, he snarled. Fabrications meant to divide us. Are they? A new voice from the edge of the courtyard. One of the noble representatives stepped forward, flanked by his own security detail. Having survived the initial chaos and rallied his forces, we heard this evidence presented in full before your attack interrupted our discussion. The proof was compelling enough that I, for one, am no longer willing to stand aside while outsiders manipulate our world's future for their own gain. More figures emerged from the shadows around the courtyard. Additional noble security, palace guards who'd scattered during the initial siege but had clearly been rallying since. The balance was shifting fast. I watched the realization dawn on Thorne's face that his position had become far more precarious than he'd anticipated. This changes nothing, he said, though his voice had lost much of its confidence. Perhaps, Isabel said, stepping forward despite my instinct to pull her back. But numbers alone have never decided the fate of kingdoms, Malric. Ask yourself honestly, do you fight tonight for a cause you believe in, or because a foreign general filled your hands with weapons and your head with promises he never intended to keep? Long silence, heavy. More rebel soldiers around Thorne began lowering their weapons, some stepping back from his side entirely. Whatever loyalty the Accord had commanded was crumbling under the weight of exposed betrayal. Thorne's eyes darted around the courtyard, calculating his rapidly diminishing options, and I saw the exact moment desperation replaced calculation entirely. His hand moved toward the weapon at his side. Except before I could react, before I could even shout a warning, someone else moved first. Rourke! He stepped between Thorne's line of sight and the Queen, not to block the shot, to clear it. Rourke, no. Too late, Thorne fired. And it wasn't at Isabel, it was at me. The impact caught my shoulder, spun me sideways with a burst of white-hot pain that dropped me to one knee. I managed to return fire before Thorne could aim again, catching him solidly in the chest. He collapsed backward, and in the chaos in that half-second where everyone's attention snapped to Thorne's fall, I saw it. Rourke's face, not shock, not fear, relief, which made no sense until it did. I remembered all at once the way his eyes had dropped a half-second too long the night before, when Isabel asked if he was ready to fight for the throne he'd failed to protect. I remember thinking a column didn't add up. Now it did. It was you, I said, voice rough, understanding hitting harder than the wound in my shoulder. You told them where the meeting was. Rourke's face crumpled. They have my sister, he said, barely above a whisper. Vane's people, 3 weeks now. They said if I didn't tell them where the Queen would be, they'd... He couldn't finish it. Brant turned to his nephew, and I watched something break in the older man's face. Not anger, grief. Rourke. I didn't want any of this, Rourke said, voice cracking. I fled the throne room because I was afraid. And then I was afraid again. And I kept being afraid, Uncle. Every single day since, until being afraid was the only thing I knew how to be anymore. Isabel stood very still, watching him. I expected her to call for his arrest, his execution even. She had every right. Except she didn't move. Not yet. Where is your sister being held? She asked instead. Rourke blinked, like the question wasn't the one he'd braced for. The old customs house near the southern docks. I don't know if she's still... Then we go get her, Isabel said, after this is finished. Brant stared at his queen like he didn't recognize her voice. Your Majesty, he betrayed you. He was broken by someone who understood exactly which lever to pull. Isabel said, that is not the same as betrayal born of ambition. There will be a reckoning, Brant, but it will be justice. Not vengeance. Those are not the same thing, and I will not let this night make me forget the difference. The remaining rebel forces surrendered within minutes. Noble representatives moved to secure the estate, calling for whatever medical assistance could be gathered in a city still recovering from days of chaos. Isabel remained beside me the entire time, refusing to leave even as advisors and newly rallied guards clamored for her attention. You should be organizing your kingdom's recovery. I managed weakly. There is time enough for kingdoms, she said, firm, leaving no room for argument. Once I know you will survive. 3 days. That's how long it took before I was strong enough to sit up properly. A comfortable room in what remained of the palace partially restored under loyalist direction. Isabel visited often, and I watched over those 3 days the exhausted, frightened figure I'd found alone in the throne room gradually transform back into the composed ruler her people needed. General Vane has been arrested, she told me on the third day, settling into the chair beside my bed. Colonel Weiss led the operation personally, using the evidence you gathered to secure authorization from your own command structure. And the arrangement, I said. The one the civilian mentioned. The one that wasn't about your kingdom at all. Her expression tightened. Weiss is still unraveling that thread. It appears Vane's ambitions reach further than one rebellion. There were others involved off-world with interests in this planet that had nothing to do with trade routes and everything to do with what lies beneath our southern coastline. That investigation continues. So this isn't over. No, she said, but the immediate threat has passed. My throne stands secure, for now. I thought about Odalia's then, about something she'd told me quietly the second night we stayed in her home, when I'd asked why she risked everything for a queen she hadn't served in years. My son worked the medical supply lines, she'd said. Years ago, before you arrived on this world, he died because someone falsified a shipment manifest to save cost on a contract. Nobody was ever held accountable. I did not help you and the Queen because I loved royalty, Dane. I helped because I have spent a long time waiting for anyone to finally read the numbers honestly. I hadn't known what to say to that then. I still didn't exactly, except now I understood it a little more. Corruption doesn't announce itself with an army. It hides inside a signature, a weight discrepancy. A word like humanitarian stamped over something that was never meant to help anyone at all. What happens to Rourke? I asked Isabel. She was quiet a long moment. His sister was found alive, malnourished, frightened, but alive. A pause. He will not be executed. He will serve. Stripped of rank assigned to the lowest duties in the palace guard for as long as it takes to prove the man Brant vouched for still exists somewhere underneath the fear. Some would call that mercy wasted. I call it a debt owed to a system that failed him before he ever failed us. That's not the easy answer, I said. No, she agreed. The easy answer is rarely the right one. I have learned that much, at least these past weeks. Weeks passed. The palace slowly rebuilt itself physically and politically. I watched Isabel navigate the delicate work of restoring trust among her people, reforming the guard structure, addressing noble houses that had wavered during the crisis. She handled all of it with a grace that left me with growing admiration for the woman I'd first met as a frightened, abandoned queen surrounded by rubble. Colonel Weiss arrived at the palace personally one afternoon, delivering news that the formal inquiry into my actions had concluded favorably, largely due to Isabel's testimony and the evidence supporting everything I'd reported. You did good work here, Harlow, Weiss told me. Quiet conversation in the palace gardens slowly recovering their former beauty under careful restoration. Not many men in your position would have stayed, especially not a supply clerk who spent 6 years being told his job didn't matter. Guess I have never been great at believing that part, I said. Weiss chuckled, though there was clear respect beneath the humor. For what it's worth, command is considering a formal commendation. Though given everything that's happened, I suspect you might have other things on your mind besides medals. I glanced toward the palace. Isabel stood on a balcony overlooking the gardens, deep in conversation with several advisors. Confident, commanding, alive in a way I hadn't seen that first terrible night. Something in my chest tightened. Yeah, I admitted. Maybe a few other things. Weiss followed my gaze, smiled knowingly, said nothing further. Just clapped me on my good shoulder before excusing himself. That evening, Isabel found me in the gardens, setting sun casting long golden light across restored pathways. She settled onto the bench beside me without invitation, something that would have felt presumptuous from anyone else. Now it simply felt natural. The alliance between our peoples has been formally renewed, she said, watching the sunset. Stronger, I believe, than before this crisis began. Sometimes trust tested through fire emerges more resilient than trust that has never faced a true challenge. I'd say that's a fair assessment, I said. There is something else, she said, turning to face me, expression more uncertain than I'd seen since those first desperate hours after the siege. Your assignment here was always meant to be temporary. Was it not eventually your command will reassign you elsewhere? Some other posting, some other mission. That's usually how it works, I said carefully. I find myself troubled by that possibility in ways I did not entirely anticipate, she said, voice quieter now, more vulnerable than her typical composed tone. You arrived in my life during its darkest hour, Dane Harlow, when I had every reason to expect betrayal, and instead found loyalty beyond anything I believed your species, or honestly any species capable of offering a stranger. I am uncertain how to properly express what that has come to mean to me. I turned to look at her fully, watching the last light catch against her skin, transforming the faint blue shimmer into something that looked almost like starlight. You don't have to figure out exactly how to say it, I said. I think I already understand. Do you? She asked, something hopeful in the question. I stayed that first night because it felt like the right thing to do, I said. But somewhere along the way, staying stopped being about right and wrong and started being about not wanting to imagine being anywhere else. I think you already know that, even if neither of us has said it plainly until now. She was quiet a long moment, then reached over, took my hand in hers, fingers cool and steady against mine. Then perhaps, she said softly, we should discuss with your command the possibility of a more permanent posting. I laughed, genuine, unguarded, the first truly light moment I'd felt since this journey began in a burning throne room weeks earlier. I think that's a conversation worth having, I said. We sat together as the sun fully set over the restored gardens. Two people from entirely different worlds who'd found something unexpected in the middle of chaos and betrayal. I thought back often in the months that followed to that first terrible night. To a queen standing alone amid the rubble of her own throne room, abandoned by everyone sworn to protect her. I thought about the choice I made in that single decisive moment. The choice to stay when every reasonable instinct told me to retreat. It cost me comfort, certainty, nearly my own life more than once throughout those harrowing days. Except it gave me something far more valuable in return. I used to believe my value as a soldier was measured by what I could carry or what I could hit at 300 yards. 6 years of manifests and cargo weights taught me otherwise. It taught me that the numbers nobody bothers to read are usually the ones hiding the truth, and that a man who pays attention quietly, patiently, without ever needing to be the loudest voice in the room, can still be the one who saves a kingdom. Odalise taught me something else. That grief, when it isn't allowed to become vengeance, can become something better. A reason to finally make the system tell the truth. And Rourke taught me the hardest lesson of all. That fear can make good people do terrible things. And that justice, real justice, isn't about punishing the broken as harshly as the ones who broke them. It's about telling the difference. I had walked into that throne room as nothing more than a lost logistics clerk searching for his convoy. I walked out eventually as someone forever changed, bound to a queen and a kingdom I never expected to call my own, in a story that began with abandonment and ended against every reasonable expectation in something that felt remarkably close to home.